John Beaudin, Rock History Book. How are you? Loving doing the important stories in rock and roll. We're enjoying presenting these sometimes quirky little stories, idiosyncratic stories about the history of rock and roll. And thank you for joining me. I appreciate that. Remember, if you want to support the channel, the two P's, you can join our Patreon. In the last little while, we've been getting a whole bunch of videos ready to give them to you early before anyone else sees them on our Patreon for all our channels, Rock History Canada, Rock History Book, Rock History Music, or you can just simply make a donation on PayPal. The links are all on the top of the description. As well, of course, you can see underneath the video where you can buy a t-shirt. If you want to wear a Rock History Canada, Music, or Book t-shirt, they're all there for you. He was in 3 major supergroups that helped shape, and I say rocker in the title. He really wasn't known as a rocker, but that's just a term that I use an awful lot. But he was in 3 major groups. Started in radio, started in production, wanted to get involved with things. And he's one of those guys that is, and we all know those guys. You may be one of those people that says, what happens if I press this? What if I press these two? I mean, just that kind of curiosity, that curious mind of wanting to do a little bit more. Our subject, who, by the way, was born December 5th, 1947. Maybe we should say happy birthday. 75 years old, Jim James Messina. In the 68, he joined Buffalo Springfield. Supergroup, who revolutionized the way, just in a few albums, the way that people looked at that country rock sort of genre. He was on their last album, last time around, hence the name. We're going to talk about all that stuff in a second, because we've got clips of our interview with Jim Messina, with Poco, picking up the pieces, the first one. And that there's all that story about Randy Meisner leaving the band because of Richie Furay not letting him in. I don't know if that's true. We asked all 3 of them, but Randy went on to, of course, be a member of the Eagles. He was in the Poco album, Deliverin', Legacy, and then, well, Legacy was a comeback album. And we have also Kenny Loggins on our clip tonight. We've got a clip of our interview with Kenny Loggins, where he talks about working with Jim Messina. But yeah, all those Loggins and Messina albums. And there's been a lot of reunions. We really enjoy talking to Kenny Loggins as well. Where shall we start with the clips? This is a clip about moving LA, Barry White, with our friend Jim Messina. I want to know, Jim Messina, getting to LA, did you feel green? Were you nervous? Can you bring me back there?
Well, I was playing someplace, and don't remember what it was, but somebody by the name of Glenn Edwards, who was working at KEZY radio at the Disneyland Hotel, somehow discovered me and asked me if I'd be willing to work for his label called Ibis Records. Now, I'm still in high school. And I said, well, what would I be doing? And he says, well, I'd like you to produce a couple of my acts. And I said, well, what does that mean? What does that entail? And he says, well, I just want you to go in, make sure their music sounds good, they're playing the right chords, and songs feel good to you. And then we'll record them on tape, and you listen to them back, and you tell me what you think. And I said, well, think about what? And he says, well, do you like the way it sounds? Are the chords right? Does the timing feel good? Those kinds of things. And if it's not, do it again, right? Till it's right. And I said, yeah, I can do that. So I started working, and I'd go down there after school on Friday, and I'd record on Saturday and Sunday, and then I'd get late and I'd sleep there, and then I'd drive early in the morning to get back to school. I set by 8 o'clock in the morning. It was really tough. It's a 65-mile drive. But I did that and got a sense of what it was like to produce records in LA. And I loved it. I just thought this is fantastic. And then when I finally graduated, I moved there. The record company didn't do well. He didn't have really any hits. But now that I'm in LA, I met a guy by the name of Mike Giroux, who was the engineer on those records at Ibis Records. And he was working at a studio where we cut called Emperor Productions. It was owned by Bob Hudson of Hudson and Lambert. He was the #1 DJ at the time, KRLA, uh, top rating, 6 o'clock drive. And he owned this little studio down on Western and Sunset, somewhere around in there. And so now I'm in LA, I'm graduated, I don't have a job. And so Michael says, well, why don't you just come to the studio and watch me do what I do and be my assistant? So, I'd be there, and we were working on, he'd get something with the Hollywood Hotline and Dick Clark and Casey Kasem, and we'd do all these, he'd do all these things. I was just there watching. And then we'd have to edit it all together. And he'd say, I want you to edit this out and do this, put this together, and taught me how to edit, taught me about compressors and limiters. And then, he was poor too. We were both poor as church mice. And he'd get a job to build something, like a studio, small studio. And then he'd hire me as the assistant and taught me how to wire the patch bays and what a balanced input was and the flow. And, we built studios. That's how I fed myself. And during the meantime, we found a couple things we'd produce here and there, for fun. Sometimes I'd just play and he'd record it and we'd do things. And then we found this group called the Deep Six. We got a hit record on them. And we were supposed to produce their album, and instead they took it to Liberty, and Joe Saraceno said, you don't want those two little punks. You need somebody professional making this record. And of course, they went in that direction. What could they do? And of course, the record failed. They had no more hits. So it was one of those things where you start learning, well, you get the right people together, you get the right song, and you play well, you can get a hit record. But it takes a whole team. And I realized being cut out of things from time to time, how you get cheated out of something, but they cheat themselves as well, thinking that they can step in and take something from somebody and make something work. So that was a good lesson in honesty and integrity and also humility. But, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I mean, all I knew is that if I continued to do what I do and learn more and more about what I love to do, my feeling was I'm not going back to San Bernardino. There's no way I'm going to go back and live with my folks. I'd rather puke and starve in Hollywood doing what I want to do, playing a session once in a while as a guitarist or building a studio. And eventually I got hired at different places. Mike got me up enough where I became a dubbing engineer for Harmony Recorders, Bob Ross music. From there I learned how to master records. A guy, I can't remember his last name. His name is Bob. He had Bobby Fuller 4. I Fought the Law, Fought the Law 1. He had a studio. Bob Krasnow, is that his name? And I went to work for him, and he had this young black kid working for him named Barry White. And Barry White and I were working together. And
the Barry White?
The Barry White. That became the Barry White. And I couldn't figure out what the hell that he and I were doing together, because I was an engineer and he was the musician and he was a drummer. And he'd get in there and he'd be playing and he'd start swearing and just, throwing sticks and stuff. And Jimmy, come here, Jimmy. He said, well, we need, he'd start telling me what we need to do. And I'm totally intimidated by this guy, But we worked together, and then years later, after Loggins and Messina, I'm at the Grammys or something, and he's there, and I'm walking up the aisle, and he looks at me and goes, Jimmy, Barry White. And I went, oh my God. And he was like right there where we were in the studio. He was totally present, which I thought was fantastic. But yeah, you get nervous. You're afraid of everything, just like you say. You don't know if you're going to say the right thing or do the right thing. But
you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know, but you do know what you do know. And as long as you stay faithful to that, and your parents raise you in a decent way, and I think it's important that when we're taught not to steal, not to lie, be respectful of your elders, and all those little simple things I think are what help make us successful in life. They really do work.